Well, let's put it this way. I think, first of all, we have to have an international capacity to prepare for disasters. Disasters don't occur to a nation because we have an international situation. The Pacific is not owned by a nation, nor is the Atlantic. So we have to have international science brought together. So I would hope that we would bring the UN or UNESCO or agencies together to bring to bear international science on how to do mitigation. So if there are vehicles, and I've heard of some, that would reduce the warming of water, we should bring that to bear. The second is, again, these are global consequences. So we should have an international, capable expert group who don't study climate change, but who are able to deal with the consequences of climate change by having the expertise in rescue, recovery, and so on. Right now, we don't have that. If you bring Brazilians together with Americans, with the French, they may not even be able to talk together on the radio. We never do that with an army. The Japanese army, the US Army, and the Korean Army train together. We have war games. What about some peace games? Some climate change games. And the third thing is we need an international bank, disaster bank, so that we don't have to have this money raising, nickels and dimes, every time there's a disaster someplace. And that bank would be run by the IMF or the World Bank, and people would develop credits for the bank by doing things that reduce climate change. So we don't need a whole bunch of exchanges of carbon and so forth. We need things that where people do mitigation, they get credits in the bank. The more mitigation they do, the higher their credits. So when they have a disaster, they can pull on their credits. Well, I think we're kind of in a post-U.S. Era, and I think we have to look to the European Union and to others to carry this on for a couple of reasons. One, the United States, unfortunately, I think over the next decade will become less international in its orientation. Already there's what I call border thinking, making fences and borders and so forth higher rather than being more open. Our president is totally of a different persuasion, but you can see what's happening to him with the Tea Party and other things that are far more provincial than we had in the recent past. So I don't see the U.S. as carrying this. I would hope that the European Union would take the lead. Well, the Sydney Harbor Bridge was built in the midst of the Depression. The Depression was far worse than these economic times. If we look at the major infrastructure around the world, it was either built right after the Second World War, when the world was penniless, basically. The United States was the only country that had money. But if you look what happened in Germany, that was done because the will of the people in Germany. Surely, yes, Marshall Plan was there and these other things. But if the German people hadn't decided to save their own country, if the British hadn't decided to rebuild their own country, when I was still in university, British people were still on rationing. They solved their problem. This is a problem we have to solve with the resources we have, not some resources we're going to get. Nothing, unfortunately. There has been a great deal of discussion at FEMA and some other places about coming up with a disaster preparedness plan. And that plan, I assume, is still in the works. It may be vetted at some levels. But the truth of the matter is we've done very little to prepare. Absolutely. Clearly, one of the things you have to think about is the people in the place and not just the place. We have places that have this huge amount of economic disparity, and most of it's associated with race. If you don't do something about that, you can either magnify the situation post-disaster because the economy falls down, or you can use the disaster as an opportunity to rectify it. We did not rectify it in New Orleans.